You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I'm joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Guys, how we doing tonight?
Doing good. Was watching a bit of playoff hockey here before the show started. We have Derek? We have 2 or 3 different drafts that we're in right now between rookie drafts and a dynasty draft here that we jumped in on that we're checking everything out at. So lots of stuff going on, but it's good. We're flying by. A little bit of news out of the NFL, a little bit more confusion out of the Deshaun Watson scenario. A lot of stuff going on here this week, but we're getting through it, and we are 1 week closer to kickoff of the 2022 season.
Kevin mentioned the playoff hockey that he was watching. I am still currently watching it, so apologies if I get a bit distracted throughout the course of the recording of the podcast tonight. But he'll
have a good 15 minutes during intermission where he'll be focused.
That's very true. It's very true.
He'll be locked in.
Very true. Yeah, I'll be laser focused then. But to kind of go back to what we aren't going to talk about this show, there were, 5 or 6 game 7s over the course of the weekend, and a couple in hockey and a couple in basketball. And the 2 basketball games were just snooze fests, and all the hockey games were close and fun and featured overtime, which there is nothing better than playoff overtime hockey. The only thing that I prefer about playoff overtime hockey is that my team is not involved in it, because that is the most stressed that I've ever been, like watching an overtime playoff hockey game. So more stressed than ever. I've been at work. Like it is unbelievable. But I'm excited to get into talking about these teams that we've got tonight. It's funny that we were kind of doing some pre-show prep, and we were talking about which quarterbacks do we need to talk about? And as we're doing these, it's kind of by, reverse order of how the teams finished. Last week, we didn't have to talk about quarterback controversy for any of those teams. And,
right.
And this week we kind of do have. So it's kind of weird that, normally we spend a little bit of time early on when we do these team breakdowns talking about quarterback controversy, but we didn't last time, because each of those teams, even though they were the 3 worst teams, by record last year, they don't have their quarterbacks in place, and that's not exactly the case for the teams that we're going to talk about tonight.
Right. And we do have a great show for you, right? Like Alex mentioned it, Kevin mentioned it. We're going to be talking about the Jets, the Giants, and the Panthers tonight, breaking down several fantasy options there. So go ahead and buckle in, strap in. Let's get this thing rocking and rolling. It's going to be a great one. Do us a favor. Make sure that you head over to YouTube, click the subscribe button on that. We go live during the off season every Tuesday night, 11 p.m. Eastern. But that way you're getting all of the notifications when we do that. So you're not missing any of these great, exhilarating teams, really, I think is a good way to describe the cellar dwellers here for fantasy options. But we're going to start getting into more and more fantasy relevant teams here as the weeks go on and we start getting closer to that. We do have some comments here. I want to rock and roll through here real quick before we get jumping into the Jets. Leadership Lessons chiming in there saying, interested to see what the boys have to say about some of these fantasy options. The Stacks app is saying these teams are rough with some good fantasy options. Yep, I would agree with that. Jeff chiming in. What's up, gentlemen? Jeff, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Jeff's been on the show before over there with Going for Two. Make sure you guys are checking out their stuff. They've always got some great content coming through. Jeff also saying, I know y'all are starting with these bad teams, but he's excited to hear about the Jets. How many times has that been said in the history of ever? Funny you should mention that. I know Kevin, what was that, 2 years ago? We were like, oh man.
It was 2 years ago with the Jets. It was Sam Darnold's last season with them. And it was, we were talking about it pre-show. We talked about it post-show. I felt like it was our worst hour of podcasting ever. Just because it was so hard to find anything fantasy relevant to talk about, and you want to bring content to the table, and you're trying to not only make it, informational, but a little bit exciting, right? So that way people, stay tuned and everything else. And talking about the Jets a couple of years ago was god awful. But this year, I promise it will be better. I think we all have a little bit of excitement around the offensive arsenal that the Jets have accumulated over the last 2 seasons. So I do expect it to be better this year, Jeff.
All right. We've also got the Competitive Edge podcast chiming in. The boys are live. Have a great show. Competitive Edge, I think that's the first time we've seen you in the chat. Appreciate you tuning in, and we will absolutely have an amazing show. Guys, if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, throw them out there as we're going through these guys, and let's have a blast. Gentlemen, are you ready to start with the Jets?
Let's do it.
Jets.
Jets. Here we go. All righty. So the Jets finished 4-13 last year. They had a 61% pass, 39% run ratio. They were ranked 28th in the NFL in points for, 26th in the league in yards for. Head coach remains the same in Robert Saleh. The offensive coordinator, Mike LaFleur. So guys, the Jets went out. And we're going to start where we always do. That is in the running back room, of course. The Jets went out and spent some early capital on an early running back. Competitive Edge here real quick. We'll just set this one up. Former guest, just under a new show name, Kenneth Contrail from the – yep. Kenny, how you doing? It is good to see you back in here. It was always a lot of fun when you were on the show there. We had a great time with that one. All righty. Good to see you. Good to see you with the new show name. Awesome. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and start here with the Jets running back. Breece Hall was drafted in the 2nd round, pick 36 from Iowa State. What are our thoughts here on Breece Hall?
I like Breece Hall. I think it's an interesting landing spot with what Michael Carter was able to do for them last year, but part of it's Robert Saleh, right? Coming from a situation where you can never have enough running backs because you just rotate them in and out. It does make sense. I think that Breece Hall is probably going to end up taking more of that 1-2 down work, right? Michael Carter will come in, I say relegated, but really fulfill the role that he used more often when at North Carolina with Javonte Williams, change of pace, if you will, a little bit better hands coming out of the backfield. But Breece Hall, the kid can catch it better than what he showed at Iowa State just because he didn't get many opportunities. So, I like Breece Hall. He is arguably going at 101 in rookie drafts for dynasty leagues. I would contend Kenneth Walker over Breece Hall, but I know a lot of people feel differently than I do on that, and that's okay. It's just one spot difference, but nevertheless, he's going to provide some power for him. He's got a nose for the end zone, so that'll help the Jets in the red zone. It's the biggest thing, right? Rookie running backs, Michael Carter included, right? Can you protect your quarterback? You're bringing in all these toys. You're bringing in all these assets to help out Zach Wilson. That's great, but for Zach Wilson to be able to distribute said football, he has to be upright and, have a little bit of time and some space to be able to see said weapons. So we're going to see how that goes. But I like Breece Hall. I like him. I don't see any problem with people, snagging him up in the mid to late third round of redraft leagues. I wouldn't typically go any higher than that. He's not the, foundational 3-down back that Najee Harris was as the 101 last year coming out in the draft. So downgrade a couple rounds because of that, but mid to late third round pick. And I think you'll see some consistency through him with what the Jets are going to be trying to do on offense.
And the other thing and Kevin, I hear that you have been listening to this podcast because, obviously, if a rookie running back, they're only as good as how long they can stay on the field, and you can stay on the field a lot longer if you can pass pro. So I think that's going to, his playing time is going to be directly correlated to how quickly he can pick that up, because that's what all rookie running backs have to struggle with, especially if you're not just like a, once in a generational talent where they can just literally find ways to get you the ball. Like, he's going to have to work to get on the field, and he's going to have to work to stay on the field, especially in those passing down situations, which, let's be honest, guys, like we know that, like, in fantasy football, you get points per carry, or, what have you, rush yards, you get the bonus points and everything. But running backs more and more are being used as pass catching options out of the backfield. And so you need to have somebody who can be in on an obvious passing down to really, help you get those bonus points in the passing game. So if Breece Hall can do that, then, there's no problem with it. I agree with you, Kevin. I was in, we had a rookie draft and I was the pick 101 and I didn't know where to go exactly, but Breece Hall was, kind of the best choice. And he is going into what I consider to be a good situation there in New York after the draft that they had and just the promise of a good season that's ahead after all of the off-season moves that they made. You get Zach Wilson in his second year. You get, wide receivers that will have to keep, it won't allow teams to stack the box against them because they have to stay honest and respect the pass game, whether or not that actually comes to fruition, because we need to see more out of Zach Wilson. But I like Breece Hall. I like what he's got to offer. Can he pick up the offense in time? I'm with you there, Kevin, on that third round ish grade, depending on how your draft and redraft falls. And if it was me, he's option 1 or option 2 when it comes to a rookie draft.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that most folks tend to take him number 1 overall when it comes to the rookie drafts, and I can't blame him, right? One of the things that does slightly concern me a little bit about this Jets offense is going to be their offensive line this year, right? That wasn't necessarily a strong suit for them last year. They had addressed the line in several of the previous drafts here, but this wasn't. But even last year, after having spent several bits of capital and draft capital on the line over the last few years, this wasn't something that we saw them really necessarily go after and heavily invest in during this offseason. So the run game is going to go how that offensive line goes. And while it was okay, it wasn't good last year. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of the same, right? One of the other things that concerns me about Breece Hall is the fact that he's an upright runner, doesn't necessarily push the pile. While he is a big body guy, he's not typically, when you're talking about a big body running back, he's not the same composition that you typically see from a big body back, right? Most of the time, the running backs that are those big frame guys, they typically have very, very, very stout, lower bodies. They're very, very big leg. It was always the arms race to see who had the bigger quads when it came to these running backs to it. But Breece Hall, a little bit more build on the upper body here. So he tends to be a little bit of an upright runner, tends to be tackled a little bit easier than a guy that you typically see that's a 6'2", 220-pound type of running back and doesn't necessarily move the pile. So I think you're right. I do think that we're going to see him be a first and second down back with Michael Carter kind of sprinkled in here a little bit for a change of pace, third down type of deal there. While he can do some pass pro and did a pretty good job of it at Iowa State, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be his calling card here at the next level. So this is one of those that if I'm looking at it and kind of early projections, I'm probably thinking that I'm going to see him around maybe about 200 carries, maybe around about 50 to 60 targets when it's all said and done. So about a 250 opportunity when it's all said and done this season, which will give him good but not great type of good not great type of fantasy finish. And I think that you'll probably see him end up mid running back 2 to back end running back 2 type of thing when it's all said and done. So not going to surprise me to see him finish somewhere between RB 18 and RB 23 this year when it's all said and done. So any other thoughts on the Breece Hall?
He does. He reminds me slightly of Joe Mixon, right? And not Joe Mixon's more complete. I think Joe Mixon did a better job all the way around. So I'm not saying he's that exact comp, but I do think there's parts of his game that do resemble Joe Mixon when you go back and look at his film. As far as, when the hole is there, the burst through the hole looks good. I think Mixon's hands are probably a touch better. Pass pro for college was about the same. Mixon didn't have to pass pro a whole lot in Oklahoma because they were spreading it and just going, right? It was get out and go. But if he does fulfill that, right, then yeah, you're looking at a guy who's, running back 12 to 15 at his peak, right? Like, I just don't see Breece Hall in this offense shooting up into, Dalvin Cook type territory. He's not that type of back. But if you can get a guy who fulfills his calling card, and maybe a year or two down the road, you have a really solid 1B type option if Breece Hall is able to fill that potential.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on there. I think for Breece Hall to get up into that like fringe RB1 territory, he's got to see double-digit touchdowns. I think that's how you see him get up in there. Is going to be, right around 10 or more touchdowns. If he doesn't get that, I think he's probably going to get 6, 7, somewhere in that range, which I think is going to keep him at that mid to back half. So cool. Alrighty, guys, let's go ahead and talk about Micheal Carter. So Micheal Carter was running back 29, 147 rush attempts, 639 yards, 4 touchdowns, 36 receptions, 55 targets, 325 yards through the air, and 0 touchdowns. Guys, your thoughts on Micheal Carter?
Carter kind of got a late start to the season last year, right? He was buried on the depth chart to start, and really kind of finally started to creep in, and as injuries kind of took over, and really as the Jets realized, let's see what this youth has, right? And see what we can do with this youth movement. Finally got some run. He was serviceable. He showed a couple flashes here and there, but he didn't blow you away, right? He was a little slow to make a decision and get through the hole, which I think that's part of the reason they brought Breece Hall in, get more of a natural runner, whereas Carter is kind of more a natural pass catcher. But he's been in this system, or at least playing under Saleh for the year now, and is able to kind of continue to build on that NFL body, a little bit different than how they do it collegiately. So I think we'll see more of his damage coming out of the backfield. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him with somewhere around, 70, 75 receptions coming out of the backfield for the Jets this year. So it keeps him in that RB3 serviceable territory. And depending on how things work out with Breece Hall, maybe he gets a couple more carries just because he's more familiar with the offense. So Carter's a guy that you can get for a pretty substantial discount. And really, when it's all said and done with, looking at the value of where you have to draft Breece Hall and where you can draft Micheal Carter, that's something that players are going to have to keep an eye on, right? And you're going to have to weigh your options there, because a lot of times you'll find more value in the less expensive guy. And I do think this could be one of those situations by the time the season's done and over with.
So I'm not gonna give my take here, but I do want to pose the question to both of you. Is Micheal Carter standalone or handcuff?
He's going to be more of a standalone on that one, just from the standpoint he doesn't have the same type of build that you see a Breece Hall have, right? Like, he's not going to be a goal line guy. He's not going to be really between the tackle kind of guy. He's not going to be, they've got other guys on the roster that they can bring in to fulfill some of that work. I think you'll see him be more of pass pro, third down type of work, change of pace.
I'd agree. It's standalone, especially in deeper leagues, standalone value. Shallow leagues, he may be one of those waiver wire guys that you can kind of bounce in between. If you're playing in a short bench, 10-man league, if that's your setup, then he's a guy that you're probably, keeping an eye on for matchups, right? If one of your guys goes down, then he's something you fill in with. But I'd say more standalone than handcuff, because even if Breece Hall goes down, we've seen what Micheal Carter is kind of by himself, and that still is mid-level RB2. You're not getting that value like you would get with a Toney Pollard or Madison, right? If Dalvin Cook goes down, those guys are fringe RB1 territory right off the bat, just on potential and offensive flow. It's not like that with Carter.
Yeah, I would liken that to him. Yeah, as far as your handcuff standalone, I would liken him more to a Nyheim Hines type right? Like that's going to be his role on this one. Should the lead back go down, it's not going to be an instant plug and play and you just see him get all the touches. Otherwise, they'll go a different route in that one.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to weigh when you're approaching the draft and you see Michael Carter's name. And Kevin, to your point, in deeper leagues, Michael Carter is going to go, but in those short bench, smaller leagues, yeah, I think that he's a guy that you kind of put the check mark next to and see what's going on, as the season progresses. But yeah, we did see a little bit about what he was. Keep in mind, this Jets offense last year was not the best. So it's hard to judge based on, last year, just the 1 year that we have. But I don't have any reason to see a sophomore slump or a regression, especially given what this offense is going to look like, this year, the pieces that they have in place to kind of take some of the pressure off of the running back position. When we talk about some of these other guys, that'll be pretty predominant features of this Jets offense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you look at last year, Michael Carter had 1 week inside RB1 territory, had a week number 1 overall finish in week 8, but that wasn't really because of his rushing work there. It came from the fact that he had 9 receptions for 95 yards to put the cherry on top on that one, had 1 rushing touchdown and 77 yards on the ground there. And when you look at that was
one of those 6-team bye weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was one of those where it was a crazy week where a bunch of guys were on bye, bunch of other running backs didn't necessarily perform up to what their projections were. So kind of a perfect storm for him to finish number 1 overall. But other than that, he had 4 finishes inside of running back 2 territory, a 21, a 20, 13, and 16. And the rest of those were outside of running back 2 territory on the weeks there. And again, all of just about those came from the fact that he was catching the ball and getting good work through the passing game on that one as well. He's not a guy that's built to be able to take 20 rush attempts, right? Like even last year with them being down, running backs being down in that, the most carries he saw in a game was 16. And, for the most part, a lot of the rest of them, he didn't even get to 10 touches on the ground there. So I don't see that changing at all. And in fact, I potentially see him seeing less rushing attempts here, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of we see him to get between 100 and 125 rush attempts on this one. But to Kevin's point, he's probably going to see 50, 60 plus receptions when it's all said and done. Would not surprise me on the slightest on that one. So I'm probably in on him right now. It looks like he's coming off the board about 87th overall. So kind of in that, that 8th round, 7th round area there. And so I could be in on him just depending upon the composition of my team at that point, but not looking to really target him there.
Yeah, he's one of the guys. He's one of the guys that you look at for a 0 RB approach, right? We'll start getting to that later on, closer to draft day. But him and Cordell Patterson and a couple of these other guys who are good fill-ins, right? Rounds 5, 6, 7, 8 that you can pick. 2 or 3 running backs out of those 4 rounds. If you're going 0 RB, that will be serviceable, right? And a large part because of the reception upside, you can kind of catch up in points that way, but by the fact that they're seeing so much volume out of the air.
Absolutely. All righty, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the wide receiver room. Elijah Moore finished wide receiver 47, 43 targets, 43 receptions, 77 targets, 538 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a 13.3% target share. What are our thoughts here on Elijah Moore?
I just want to see him healthy, right? Like he showed a little bit of promise there, then he got dinged up and it was just kind of wonky there at the end of the season. But before he got hurt, right? So weeks 11, 12, and 13 saw a big chunk of the target share, right? So 11 targets, 8 targets, 12 targets again, had a high of 141 yards, got 5 touchdowns in on the season, like you mentioned. So I do think the potential's there. It's just, can he stay healthy and not miss 5 games like he did last year? and we can't plan on injuries. So I like him as a wide receiver 3 on my fantasy team. I don't know that I'm particularly going for him any higher just because this Jets offense, until they prove me wrong, lacks explosiveness. So I'm not going all in on Jets receivers, to say the least. But, if it's a deep league and you have to start 3 wide receivers, he's a guy that, depending on your approach, you could fill in as possibly a flex or that 3rd wide receiver spot and know that he's going to be seeing volume week in and week out.
Yeah, I mean, the guy only played, 11 games last year, got to start in 6 of them. He's only averaging 7 targets a game. So, like, you like to see that number creep up a little bit. And granted, he was catching a little over half of the targets that he was getting his way. And again, that's a rookie quarterback that's learning the NFL and having to deal with that. But you'd think that there would be a little bit more cohesion between the rookies, that they would, they'd have the most time working together of anybody on the offense because of rookie minicamp and OTAs and presumably the work that they do in the off season together and all that. So it's a little disappointing. Not the fact that he couldn't stay healthy was a big part of that. So if the targets go up, which I anticipate they will, because I think that the Jets will be a little bit more consistent on offense when it comes to that. The touchdown numbers are okay for what he had. He had 5 touchdowns in those 11 games. It's not a bad clip to be operating at. So if he can continue on that pace, then he's in good shape. But he's a wide receiver 3. He's nothing more than that. He's in deep leagues. He's a guy that you put on your bench and maybe even on a best ball, if you're playing in a crazy deep league, a guy that you hope will go off every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what the chemistry looks like between him and Zach Wilson, simply from the standpoint that even when they played together last year, like, they really weren't on the field much together. And Elijah Moore's best finish last year came when he was when Zach Wilson was out. So in week 9, Elijah Moore was the number 1 overall wide receiver and Zach Wilson didn't play. And again, right, like Alex, you mentioned the 5 touchdowns, those 5 touchdowns came in a total of 4 games. So, weeks 9, 10, 11, and 13. And those were his best finishes on the season there as well. When he didn't score a touchdown, he was not even inside wide receiver 2 territory. So some interesting things there. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how they progress with him and how they do that one. But I like the fact that, what you guys are talking about, kind of that wide receiver 3 territory and where he's going at. Like, you can easily put him as your wide receiver 3 or a flex type of option as far as roster construct, because right now coming off the board, he's kind of sitting there at the 71st overall pick. So, that puts him back of the 6th, early of the 7th type of range there. So, pretty easy to put him in there as a wide receiver 3 for most of, especially how we tend to construct rosters. Like, that's a very easy and doable thing there for it. One of the things that does worry me there a little bit is the fact that you have a very nebulous type of situation with this receiving core. And I have a feeling that you're going to see one of those kind of emerge and the rest of them will stay inside that nebulous type of cloud there, that it's going to be one of these guys will be good for fantasy and the rest will ultimately disappoint for that one. So comment coming in here. Moore came in strong at the end of the season, but the Jets will build around defense and a run game, the 49ers model. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that one. I think that you'll see them do a lot of run, and really their draft also suggested that they'll try and run a Niners defense like you saw Saleh do out there as well. Guys, any other thoughts on Elijah Moore? All righty, Garrett Wilson, drafted in the 1st round, pick 10 from Ohio State. What are your thoughts here on Garrett Wilson?
I am not the believer in Garrett Wilson that everybody around me seems to be. Don't get me wrong, the kid has some talent, but I do think he needs a lot of work on his route running. I don't feel like he's very polished. Separation is good, but at times seems to lose a little bit of focus when bringing balls in. I'm interested to see how his contested catch ratings go here throughout the season, right? Because in Ohio State, when they were running him with Wilson and Olave and the sophomore, that was really the best one of the three. Anyway, that three-headed approach at wide receiver, it was a dealer's choice, and Wilson was often the recipient of lesser coverage because at the time the other two wide receivers were, demanding a little bit more on the coverage side. So I think he's going to be serviceable, but I don't know that he is going to be serviceable like first round talent that they drafted him. High end first round talent, I guess, is what I'm going after. So I'm a buyer beware with Wilson. I'm kind of skating around him in rookie drafts. I'm grabbing London. I'm grabbing Olave, and if I'm towards the back end, I'm grabbing like George Pickens. Like those are kind of the three wide receivers in the first round that I'm heavily in on. But we'll see how this kind of progresses because Zach Wilson has an arm, right? Like that is one thing, and Garrett Wilson is blazing fast. So if he's able to get behind the defense and at least keep the safeties honest, right? That helps Breece Hall, that helps the offensive line, and it does serve a purpose. But he has to be able to get that separation at the NFL level and then bring down the contested catch, because if defenses don't fear him, they're just going to let him run all day long, and if he catches 1 out of every 10, then we're just going to, take that and live with it.
Yeah, will he be anything more than just a decoy to try and, open up some other options? That's kind of the big question that we have to get answered when it comes to Garrett Wilson. I honestly didn't. I liked Olave better than I liked Wilson coming out of Ohio State. But again, you have to realize that like Ohio State, what you're seeing out of those guys, while there is true talent there, that there's so much talent on that team and the way that they run their offense, and a lot of times, they would just be punishing teams by the time that that they. You don't get an accurate snapshot of the skill set of what these guys actually are. So that's something that, to steal from Kevin, his phrase, it's buyer beware with it. It's because you don't really actually get a good idea of who Garrett Wilson actually is in an offense against, defenses that can actually, play defense, and the games don't get out of hand. And then it's just, a track meet for the whole game. So, I don't know that I'm necessarily in on Garrett Wilson. I'd be shocked. I'll be shocked if he finishes higher than wide receiver 2, than wide receiver 3, because I think there's a ton of talent in front of him, and I think it's going to take a while for him to figure out the NFL. And again, will he be anything more than a decoy for this Jets offense?
Yeah, I'm not going to beleaguer the point, because I think you guys have both made it very well at this point, that, for me, he is going to be a guy that is going to take some time to come into this offense and really take a little bit of time to develop on this one. So I'm also going to be out on Garrett Wilson, as far as where he'll probably end up going in redraft leagues, because you'll probably see him sneak up. Not going to surprise me to see him sneak up into maybe like the 5th, 6th round type of thing when it's all said and done. And at that point, I'm out on him. So, I'm just out. I'm trying to think of something nice to say, and I'm running out of options.
That's a problem, and I think a lot of people will see him go. Golly, sorry, Abs just had a breakaway. We'll see him go like a lot earlier than he probably should, and quite honestly, I think what we'll end up talking about a year from now is like, oh, how disappointing he was because of where you drafted him. I just don't think he's going to be that much of a disappointment if you temper your expectations going into this draft. So. You may have to pay a steep price if you want to get him this year, but you go next year and the price may not be so high because of how many people will be turned off by the idea of him because he didn't live up to their expectation of him. So, I mean, that's something that to pay attention to in redraft leagues is maybe not this year, but maybe next year you get him at a better value, a probably closer value to what he actually is.
Right. Like I'm okay taking a flyer on him in like the 9th, 10th round type of thing, but I doubt that he's going to be there at that late. Another comment coming in here. Jeff saying Garrett Wilson's routes are helter-skelter was the phrase that he used. Doesn't know if he even knew what direction he was going in half the time, but he made it work. Chemistry will be key with him and Zach Wilson. I think that is pretty spot on there, Jeff. So. All righty, another guy that they brought back this offseason, Braxton Berrios, finished wide receiver 57 last year, 46 receptions, 65 targets, 431 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, 11.23 target share. Your thoughts on Braxton Berrios?
So Berrios was set to be a free agent, and I really think that Zach Wilson knocked on everybody's door and saying, hey, I'd like this guy back. Like, I feel like this is one of Zach Wilson's guys. And it's not that his stats blow you out of the water, but he is extremely serviceable. He's really sure-handed. Zach Wilson did seem to trust him as the season went on. Part of it is because he was the one healthy receiver there for a while as everyone around him was getting injured. But, even as a free agent, he went down I think they all went down to Florida. And as a free agent, he went down to train with the Jets. Like, you have to be pretty certain, right, that you know where you're going to end up and with the people around you. If a wide receiver room from a specific team is going down, and yes, you were a part of them, but at the moment you are a pending free agent. And he still went down to go run routes and train with everybody. So he's another guy. I think his bottom end wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type area. I think there's some upside there, depending on if those touchdowns tick up, right? If he goes from 2 touchdowns to 6 touchdowns, instead of 58, now you're looking at 42 or 38, something like that. I mean, there's that big of a swing when you add, 4 more touchdowns in on that mix. So he's a depth piece, right? Like, he's not a guy that I'm searching after, but he is a depth piece in deep leagues, in leagues that are a little bit more shallow. He's a guy that you just kind of flag. Maybe you keep an eye on him to see how the Jets are going to use him. But at the moment, he's number 4 on this depth chart any way you spring it, right? Like, you have Wilson, you have Moore, you still have Corey Davis, and then you have Berrios. Like, I'm not quite sure how he sees enough volume to walk his way up to wide receiver 3 territory unless he goes bananas with touchdowns, and there's no way to predict that. Like, if he comes out and has more than 5 or 6 touchdowns, like, I don't care who you are, you're not predicting that today.
Yeah, I think, with Berrios last year, it was just, the guy who was healthy, right? Like, he was just the only option for a lot of that season. So what you take in his availability versus his actual ability, that was part of it. So yes, Kevin, he's very touchdown dependent. If the touchdowns are there, if the touchdowns creep up, then he becomes a better option. But I didn't think we'd ever say this, but the Jets receiving room is a little crowded here, and there's going to be a few mouths to feed. That, how does Zach Wilson handle that with these options, and does somebody link up better than somebody else? So it's a little concerning, the amount of options that Zach Wilson all of a sudden has. But for Berrios, he's definitely not somebody that I'm seeking out to draft, really in any league, even in our crazy super league where we have, 20 rounds or whatever it is, and a crazy deep bench, and we start 14 positions, So I think he's not really somebody that I'm targeting. If he happens to fall to me at the right spot, then maybe. But beyond that, I think I'd probably look elsewhere.
So, yeah, I mean, Braxton Berrios in most leagues is going to be an undrafted guy when it's all said and done, right? Like, when it comes to redraft, he'll still be on the board when the board's done being picked on it. And Yeah, I think this is one of those that they brought him back to be just kind of that depth piece, be more of a special teams type of guy. To Kevin's point, he has great hands. Did a pretty good job, returning some punts, returning kicks for them as well in the past. So I think that that's really going to be his role, as that special teams type of guy, and can fill in and be a depth piece for him. But even last year when they were depleted at wide receiver, you didn't see his snap count for the season really tick up above about 50%. So I don't know that you're going to see him be anything more than a depth piece. And that's how I'm going to kind of treat that one for him as well. So yeah, he's just kind of he's just kind of there, just kind of another guy there for that offense. Jeff's chiming in saying that he's to Zach Wilson what Hunter Renfrow is to Derek Carr. Yeah, I could see that. Stacks up yet he's just kind of there. So
I do kind of like that comparison, and it's a security blanket, right? Young quarterbacks need security blankets. They didn't really have the tight end security blanket, so Berrios was the security blanket for Zach Wilson last year.
Yeah, the 5'9", 170-pound security blanket. So
he was a vacuum. He did darn near everything that was thrown in his direction. So that helps.
He did. But I mean, he even had games where he had poor fantasy finishes and saw like 11 and 12 targets. So, and there's something to be said on that too. So, all righty, let's. Kevin, did you have another thought there?
Nope, I'm good. We can move on.
All right. Let's go ahead and head on over to Corey Davis. So Corey Davis, wide receiver 65, 34 receptions, 59 targets, 492 yards, 4 touchdowns, 10% of the target share. Your thoughts on Corey Davis?
He holds a special place in my heart because the 2 games he performed last season, I called on this show, right? He was my shine of the week. Both times he broke out, and then I left him alone. Like, I didn't keep going back to the well. So there's a little bit where he kind of, I'm endeared to him. Part of it is he just wasn't healthy last year, guys, right? The biggest thing now with the way this room's composed is there's a lot of quick twitch guys around him, right? With Wilson and Elijah Moore and even Berrios to an extent. Like, Corey Davis is either going to be the odd man out because he is so different than everybody else, or he is going to be treated as the true X for this team, right? And you have him kind of at that chain moving possessional type receiver who can get deep every once in a while, and then you have Wilson as your guy to go deep over the top outside the numbers, and you have Elijah Moore who is your traditional slot guy, and Berrios just kind of fills in, right? And I get these guys move around, but y'all know what I'm talking about. So that being said, I'm not drafting Corey Davis this year. Like, I kind of took my chance on him last year as a 3rd or 4th receiver, whatever I had him in on my home league team. And yeah, he worked for those 2 weeks, but then it was nothing but pain, right? He was injured. He sucks against the Patriots. Like, it was just kind of one of those things. And in that division, the way that they're starting to get loaded up on defense and everything else, Corey Davis, from being drafted again, right, another first-round guy, he was drafted to be a dominant wide receiver. Has never quite panned out to that, right? That's why Tennessee let him go. And last year we saw slight glimpses, but then the injury bug bit him. So I do think he finishes better, right? I think he's a wide receiver 3 by the time it's all said and done with and what he finishes at. But I do think you're going to see some peaks and valleys within that. So I'm probably staying away from him unless I absolutely get forced into it via injury or bye weeks. I might take a flyer on him in a best ball league just for depth and to see how it goes. But he's not really explosive, so I don't know if I'm looking at him in a best ball league either. So someone's going to draft Corey Davis, and I wish him the best of luck. But I don't see him being on any of my teams this year. I just don't see how he truly fits into this Jets offense.
I have nothing more to add. those are my thoughts exactly. Like, not to be, boring podcast host, but seriously, that's the same thing. Too many questions. He is the phrase that I think we'll use a lot during this episode, but he is health averse, or was last year, and just if he can stay healthy, there's just too many question marks surrounding what his role is going to be in this offense. So I am also out on Corey Davis.
Okay, well, I'll be in then. I'm in on Corey Davis, especially from the standpoint when you look at where he's going to be drafted at is round 14. At round 14, if we think that his ceiling is can be wide receiver 3 territory, I'll throw a dart at him in round 14 and see what sticks there on that one, right? Like it's throwing darts at that point anyway. But this is one of those that, again, right, I address concerns that I have with some of the offensive line here with the Jets. Corey Davis, I think, will be the security blanket for Zach Wilson when this thing's all said and done, right? Like, he will be the guy that will be able to get there, run the short intermediate routes, and Zach Wilson will be able to find him. And I think that we saw some good connection with them early on in the season last year. And then you saw Corey Davis just, couldn't stay healthy. But when he was healthy early on in the season, those two did have the connection. And that was the guy that Zach Wilson was looking for. So I think that you'll see that carry over this year, and Corey Davis to be the security blanket for a young quarterback here. And so, while they'll run some elaborate route patterns and route combinations with Garrett Wilson, with Elijah Moore, even with the potential Braxton Berrios in there, I do think that you'll see Corey Davis still be on the field 80+% of these 80+% of snaps out there, and he will be the security blanket that's just going to be the chain mover. And when it's all said and done, I think that you're going to see him get anywhere from about 100 to 120 targets when it's all said and done. And I'll take a guy that I can pick up that late with the ceiling of wide receiver 3. I'll be in on that one. So I kind of like that, and I think he probably has the best finish of this wide receiver room when it's all said and done here in New York next year. Any other thoughts?
His career high is 5 touchdowns.
Yep.
Over or under?
Push.
I also push. That's terrible. You got to set it at half.
But I mean, I get what you're saying on a career high. Like, that's not a great number there. But I do think that you're going to see him probably end up with about 70 receptions, probably get up there around 800-900 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns, which that's going to be a pretty decent season, especially if I'm able to pick him up in the double-digit rounds. Like, I'm okay with that kind of production from a guy that's going to be probably a wide receiver 4 or 5 on my team to add that kind of depth to it. So, again, I'll be in on him on that aspect.
I'll let you have him.
Okay, sounds good. So I already took your luck that you wished me, and I have that check marked on my calendar.
Yeah, best of luck, dude. Seriously. Go for it.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and head on over to the tight end room here. CJ Uzomah coming in over the offseason, coming from the Bengals. 49 receptions, 63 targets, 493 yards, 5 touchdowns, a 12.6% target share last year in Cincinnati. Your thoughts on CJ Uzomah?
Pass.
Really?
Most of his production came 1 week in Cincinnati. He had 1 week in Cincinnati where he blew the doors off, and everyone in the fantasy community pissed down their leg to run out and try and grab this next tight end, and he's going to be a viable piece in this Bengals high-powered offense. And then he really didn't do squat. If he can't perform and he's not reliable in a high-powered offense, there's not enough balls around to service him in a Jets offense. Therefore, pass.
I guess in a position like tight end, I see what you're saying there, but he's actually somebody that I would keep my eye on, especially if I'm not going to go tight end early. I think that he would be, somebody that you could probably get a good value on. And granted, yeah, he had 5 touchdowns last year and tight end, outside of those, top 3 guys, or is it even just 3 anymore? Is it still just 2? I guess we'll throw Mark Andrews in with Kelsey and, oh gosh, why can't I think of his name out of San Francisco? Kittle, thank you.
Waller.
Waller, I guess Mark Andrews. So out of those top, 3 or 4 guys, I think there's value with Uzomah. So like that's where I'm at with him. I'm definitely going to keep my eye out for when that tight end train starts to roll, because I don't think he goes in the first tight end train. I think he goes in the second. And again, Zach Wilson's still a young quarterback. That's a big target for him to find. So I kind of like it.
I wish you luck, sir. I'm going to give you the same speech I just gave Derek. Best of luck to you. I'm going to let you have him.
Yeah. Well, and you know what, Alex, you're right. He is probably going to be a late tight end target, probably a guy that's going to be going very, very late in drafts, potentially, 14th, 15th round type of deal there. Wouldn't surprise me. But Kevin brings up some very, very good, solid points there, right? He actually had 2 weeks last year where he had amazing performances. He finished tight end 1 in both of those weeks, in week 4 and week 7. But when you look at his overall production, 38% of all of his yards came in those 2 weeks, and 80% of his touchdowns came in those 2 weeks there. So he is kind of the definition of a late tight end. You're drafting that guy to get a couple to 4 weeks out of that guy before you initially pivot and move on and stream the next guy there. He's not a guy that I think you're going to get that just season long production out of late round tight end that we've seen pop over the last few years. I don't think he's that guy. Also, again, with this wide receiver room that we just spent all that time with, it's a nebulous type of situation, and I don't trust that you're going to see him get more than 13% of the target share in this offense either. So I think I'm out.
7 was a fluke.
Mm-hmm. Not saying it wasn't. I'm just
3
saying
for 3 for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Right, he had the
tight end.
He had that one big long play.
It's like a Rocket Ishmael stat line from way back when he was playing with the Cowboys. Like,
good throwback name.
Well, right? Like, that's what that's like. You're not going to see that. You can't bank on that.
No.
Like, it's more probable that he goes 3 targets, 2 receptions, and 22 yards in that game than it is 3 for 3 and 91 with 2. Like, and the stats are the stats. The points added up, and you got credit for them if you had the stones to start him that week. But again, all that added in, Alex, be my guest. You go ahead and draft him. I will allow that. Hell, I'll put him on your roster today if that's who you want as your tight end. And I will move on and be just as happy.
Well, I'm not really picking much in the first 4 rounds, so I'm going to have to get creative in the home league this year.
Oh, that's awesome. Alrighty. Hey, real quick before we head on over to the quarterback room here, we do have a question coming in. Redraft half and full point PPR, Darnell Mooney or Marquise Hollywood Brown. Which way you rolling here?
I guess Marquise, because he's the number 1 guy for the first 6 weeks.
All right.
And at least you have Kyler throwing you the ball.
Right.
Justin Fields showed signs of improvement. He had some relationship with Darnell Mooney. But now that teams are can study that film, like I guess I've never been a big Darnell Mooney hype guy. So I'd rather have Hollywood Brown in an offense that I can at least trust Kyler Murray slightly, and Cliff Kingsbury might be a terrible coach, but he is an offensive mind, as opposed to a new system in Chicago with a young and developing quarterback still, and trying to figure out where these pieces in Chicago fit in as they make a run to be 3rd in that division.
Alex, thoughts?
I'd go with Marquise Brown too there. I think that's just because of the opportunity that he's going to have to start the season, and maybe, he can command that and he runs with it or not, but he's got the better opportunity, I think, at the start of the season. And that's where I would lean.
Yeah. I think I'm right there with you guys, but again, right, like that was no surprise that I'm going to go with the guy out of Oklahoma there. But for a lot of the same reasons you guys just said, right? Like Darnell Mooney is in a bad offense that's in a run-first offense there. And part of the reason you saw him do so well last year for fantasy performance, which, oh, by the way, even when Darnell Mooney was just getting peppered with targets, right? He saw almost 27% of the target share in there, still finished wide receiver 24 last year when it was all said and done. And that was on 140 targets. So, yeah, the ball is coming his way, weren't overly catchable. 81 receptions on 140 targets, broke 1,000 yards, 4 TDs. At this point, I think that you're going to see Marquise Hollywood-Brown get more touchdowns than that. I don't know that you're going to see Darnell Mooney get much of an uptick, maybe up to 6, maybe up to 7. But I think that Chicago, all that the opposing defenses are going to do is play bracket coverage on that and kind of take him out of games. So I'm going to be on the Marquise Hollywood-Brown there for that pick in redraft and in regardless of half point or full point PPR there. All righty, guys, let's go ahead and head on over into the quarterback room. Zach Wilson finished QB 30 last year, 213 completions, 381 attempts, 55.6 completion percentage, 2,334 yards, 9 TDs, 11 interceptions, 29 rushes, 184 yards and 4 touchdowns. Your thoughts on Zach Wilson?
I do think we see improvement here, right? I think he gets on the right side of the touchdown to interception ratio. I don't think he's going to miss 4 games for getting dinged up this year. He's going to learn, get down, protect yourself, that type of thing. I think the run game is going to help him a little bit more this year. So the defense obviously improving will give him more opportunities. So instead of quarterback 30, I think you're looking closer to quarterback 20, maybe 19, 20, somewhere in that range. If you're 4 or 5 for Corey Davis, like we said, you're probably looking at 4 for Moore, so 9, 2 for Uzomah. There's 11. So what? We're going to get to 17, maybe 17 touchdowns. By the time it's all said and done with, call it, 10 interceptions, something like that, maybe 11. So it does improve, but not as much. Zach Wilson, Zach Wilson's a best ball quarterback. Sorry. Let me get to my point. Zach Wilson's a best ball quarterback. I want to capitalize on his highs because we saw a couple of those towards the end of the season, right, where he finished in that top 5 quarterback range and could really show off some of his arm talent. It is there, but I would rather react to this situation and this particular quarterback than go out and grab him and take my chances on in a super flex league. So, and redrafts more often than not, single quarterback leagues, he's probably not going to get drafted. So he's going to be on that waiver wire of guys that you can kind of pick up and take a look at. Perfectly fine. Play the matchup if you want. But he's not QB1. I think he improves into bottom half of quarterback 2 territory, but there's still a long list of guys that I would take over Zach Wilson in any type of redraft format.
So obviously we need to see, really just, the attempts go up, the yards go up. That's going to help, right? And we think that that's going to happen with a little bit more confidence and a few more weapons to throw to, and a reliable running game. I think he's going to be a tough one. He's got value in super flex leagues just because he's a starting quarterback, right? That's the value there, is that he is a starting quarterback in the league. But beyond that, in single quarterback redraft leagues, like, he is nothing more than just a bench, your bye week fill-in. You hope that he doesn't have the same bye week as the guy you draft as your starter. So that's where I am with Zach Wilson. I guess I'm not a huge believer, despite some of the things that I said about some of the guys that he'll be throwing to and the running backs that he'll have. But I'm not super sold on him. I do think though that he will have a serviceable year. That's one.
That was a big one. All right. So Kevin, very much agreeing with what you're saying there, Alex. And Kevin kind of hit the nail on the head as far as what I'm kind of thinking. I'm thinking kind of in that QB 20 to 24 range. Yeah, I think we see, probably closer to another 800 to 1,000 more yards. Probably about another 8-9 touchdowns on this thing. Interceptions probably remain the same. And if he can keep his rushing baseline where he gets about 200 yards and 4 TDs on the ground, like that's going to do some very good things for him too. But again, this is not one of those that I'm actively looking to put Zach Wilson in as my second QB in a super flex. He's a guy that I'm looking to put on my roster as the third QB out there, and that's kind of where I see him and see the value for him going forward. Any other thoughts on Zach Wilson or the Jets?
Much better than 2 years ago.
Much better.
On to the next one.
Now, this team here is one that I'm not overly excited to talk about tonight here, but this is one I was going through and almost liking it to the Jets from a few years ago. Not as bad, but close. All right. The Giants last year, 4-13, 59% pass, 41% run. They were ranked 31st in points for, 31st in yards for. New head coach Brian Daboll, offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. Guys, your thoughts on, as soon as we get to him. All righty, heading to the running back room. Saquon Barkley, running back 32, 162 rush attempts, 593 yards, 2 touchdowns, 41 receptions, 57 targets, 263 yards through the air, and 2 touchdowns. Guys, your thoughts on Saquon Barkley?
Before Kevin gets in and gives a pretty good and accurate representation of Saquon Barkley, I was burned hard. I don't think there was anybody who was higher on Saquon Barkley last year than me, and I was burned hard by him. And to the point where I was stubborn enough to hang on to him for a lot longer than I should have and tried to ride that train out just to prove myself right. So for no reason other than I'm personally pissed off at myself and his performance last year, I will not be touching Saquon Barkley this year. Even if he is the best available player when it comes for my team to draft, Saquon Barkley will get overlooked.
Yeah, I'm not believing it. Part of it's the Giants' offense right now. We might be seeing a bit of a change now that Joe Judge is out of there, and we're going to be changing offensive philosophies. But they're coming into this team. Saquon's not their guy. Daniel Jones isn't their guy. Kenny Galladay's not their none of these are their guy. So I'm not very high on this offense. It could be one of, if not the worst offenses in the league this coming season. I know we had a former guest who would disagree with me, but that's okay. And we're just going to move on. But Saquon, he looks slow, guys. And I'm thinking maybe this offseason we'll see a lot of hype as training camp rolls around. Barkley looks like his old self, and he's got his burst back and everything else. Barkley is a guy that I am staying away from at all cost. He is health adverse, the phrase that Alex used earlier, and I'm just going to go other directions. I would rather skip it and be wrong than pick him and be right about the fact that he's going to fail miserably. I haven't worked on running back rankings yet. I don't think he's going to be my top 12 this year. I just don't see it happening for him. This is kind of in name only. So he's an RB2, and he's a shaky RB2 because he hasn't proven to be healthy the last 2 seasons. So buyer beware. But he is not a guy that I'm going after under any circumstances whatsoever. I know that there are people in the Northeast who definitely disagree with that, and that's okay. But we're going to agree to disagree on this one. I'm not going anywhere near Barkley this year.
Yeah, and Saquon wasn't even in my top 12 last year going into to redraft, and took some heat on that one for sure, and felt it definitely kind of proved out there when it was all said and done. And I don't see anything really changing on this one, right? The analysis still holds true, very similar to what I was saying last year, that Saquon's true value for fantasy came through his work through the passing game and far more than it necessarily did on the running game. And that great season came with Eli Manning, who was check down king on that one. Who Daniel Jones, that's not necessarily his game, and that's not how that's going to play. So I don't see him see Saquon jumping back up inside of a top 12 running back one type of territory. And realistically, I think he's a back half RB2 when it's all said and done here. Even if he stays healthy, even if he plays the full year, I don't know that we are going to see much. We're going to see some more production, but I don't know that we're going to drastically see a huge turnaround here. I just don't see that one happening for this one. So Saquon will not be on any of my rosters shy of, shy of me getting him in like the 7th or 8th round, and I'm picking him up as an RB3 or 4. Like that's where I would probably take him, and I'm not looking at much before that.
Who finishes higher, Zeke or Saquon?
Zeke.
Alex?
I'm sure the suspense was killing you. I was trying to get my unmute button. Zeke.
So, and I'd agree with that. And for all the people who love to bash on Zeke, right? Part of it's because he's a Cowboy. Part of it's because they had these mile-high expectations, and that's what people are putting on Saquon. Like, they're living off of 2018 and 2019. Like, we are 2 full seasons, and in the middle of an offseason removed from him being truly fantasy relevant. And people need to understand that. It is time to move on. And there, like I said, there's a list of guys. Zeke, Aaron Jones. I would Travis Etienne is a guy that I think has a better fantasy season than Saquon.
Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs easily finishes above him.
Saquon Barkley. Antonio Gibson is the guy that I think finishes better than Saquon Barkley. Like, Barkley and Miles Sanders are in the same tier to me. Like, that's how far he has fallen from grace in my eyes. Like, I am not a Miles Sanders supporter either. We'll cover that in a few weeks with the Eagles. But I'm just not believing this. Like, and people who are drafting him in the 2nd or 3rd round are going to be set up to fail, because you cannot win your fantasy league in your first, couple rounds, but you can damn sure lose it. And if you're drafting Saquon in the first 3 rounds, I'm putting my stamp on it and calling my shot. You will not win your fantasy league if you draft Saquon in the first 3 rounds.
All righty. Let's go ahead and head on over to backup running back there, Matt Breida. Coming over on this one, I'm just going to kind of stop short here and say I am out on Matt Breida. Any differing opinions on Matt Breida?
I'm going to look at him in deep leagues as a running back depth piece, because I don't trust that Saquon can be healthy. So if I can pick him up in somewhere between rounds 16 and 20, maybe, just kind of depending on how that shakes out, I'll pick him up as a flyer, because I don't expect Saquon to stay healthy. So I'll get a couple weeks of a starting running back out of it if I need it.
Alex, any other thoughts?
Nope.
All righty, on to the wide receiver room here. Kenny Golladay, who was a big free agent signing for them going into last year. Wide receiver 84, 37 receptions, 76 targets, 521 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a 13.5% target share. Your thoughts on Kenny Golladay?
Big money to come over from the Detroit Lions. And, excuse me, Derek was talking faster than I can pull my notes up. Here we go. So a lot of it was the connection piece with Daniel Jones, right? Like, his target percentage didn't drastically change from when he was with Matthew Stafford. His depth of target did change drastically, and he was dinged up in the middle of the season. So all that kind of added in. He didn't have any touchdowns. 0 fat goose egg for touchdowns. That's never good for fantasy performances. But again, this Giants offense was pretty anemic. Like, there wasn't a whole lot to get excited about. And this is kind of a prove it year, right? Because I think I'd have to look at the cap space, but I think Golladay could be a cap casualty next season. I think they owe him too much this year. But next season, he could be a cap casualty. So I do expect his numbers to improve slightly with where he's going. I think I'd be interested to take a flyer on him at a wide receiver 3 type level. I think the talent is still there. I think the offensive philosophy is yet to be determined as they change coaches, and the chemistry with Daniel Jones has to improve. But if Daniel Jones has a short leash, which could be possible, and Tyrod comes in, I think Golladay is like a diamond in the rough with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. So that's something to keep an eye on also.
Yeah, I think there were high expectations on Kenny Golladay. He comes in with, the big contract. He's the big free agent that they get. He's supposed to be the guy there, and then it just didn't really work out. And really, there were a lot of things that were wrong with this Giants offense last year. Saquon not being healthy, or back at full strength and full speed, and Daniel Jones sometimes remembering what team he plays for, and that throwing the football to those guys is okay. In fact, it's encouraged. So look, there's no way that he has another 0 touchdown season, right? Like that's just no possible way. And if there is, then there's huge problems. So obviously there's going to be an improvement. You'll get the touchdown bonus points that way. I think that Kenny Golladay, for everything that he, was, and especially given, some of the options that are around him, even with a shaky Daniel Jones, or if Tyrod comes in, I still think that, he gets a couple touchdowns. He's back up in that low end, wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 range. And now I know that's not where, you would expect basically a wide receiver 1 in terms of depth chart to perform, but that's about the ceiling for this Giants team.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny Golladay, I think this is one of those that in order for him to have a lot of, good fantasy production, you really need to see him tick up there and get somewhere around about 115 to 125 targets when it's all said and done. That's going to be the big question mark is he going to get that type of target volume? Are the Giants going to throw those balls, for him to be able to do, because he's never been a possession guy, right? Like that hasn't been his calling card. That hasn't been his trademark. He's always been the big play down the field, big threat guy to a big body guy, a contested catch guy that can go up, high point the ball and just beat a defender there. And Daniel Jones is supposed to be able to throw a very good deep ball on that one. And so, we were looking at this one, that this was supposed to be a very good, combination going into it. And Kenny Golladay was health resistant last year and, limited his upside there a little bit. So if he can see a massive tick up in target share, I think that everything else kind of falls in line with that. And the point that, if you can see him get that 115 to 125 targets, I think you'll see his receptions get up there around that 70 to 80 mark, him probably get around 1,100 yards, and probably you'll see him 5-6 touchdowns on that one, which at that point moves him up the board there quite a bit. And I think this is a guy that he definitely has some value when it comes to fantasy drafts, because right now he's going in the double digit rounds, and a guy that's a double digit round that is a big play type of deal, I'll take a dart throw on and see what can happen there, and just see if I can find a little diamond in the rough, to use the same phrase Kevin was using there. So I like it, and from where his draft position is, I think that you'll be able to find some value on him.
Yeah, my big indicator for him is going to be his depth or yards per target, right? So when he was in Detroit, he averaged just over 10 yards per target. His first season with the Giants, it was down to 6.8. Like, there's a big difference in 4 yards per target over the course of a season. So I'm going to keep an eye on him. Like I said, he's a guy that I will take a flyer on as a 3rd or 4th wide receiver, depending on how the board falls. But like you said, Derek, the upside is there, but you got to be willing to take that risk, because if Daniel Jones can't pull his head out of his butt, then we're going to be in for the exact same thing we saw last year.
I would agree. Let's go ahead and head on through to the next wide receiver, Darius Slayton, wide receiver 104, 26 receptions, 58 targets, 339 yards to the air, 2 touchdowns, 10% target share. Your thoughts on Darius Slayton?
I'm passing on Slayton. Like I just don't have enough trust in Daniel Jones. There's not enough balls to go around. Golladay, maybe Toney are the two guys that I'll kind of key in on here. So Darius Slayton is out for me. There's rumors that there's been disgruntled. He was disgruntled with the Giants front office, that he could possibly be cut. All the things like that. So I am out on Darius Slayton for now.
I would agree with that. He didn't have it last year. He was only in 13 games, and just even when he was in there, he wasn't very productive. So I am firmly out on Darius Slayton.
Agreed. So unanimous pass on that one. And we'll go ahead and move on to Wan'Dale Robinson, the second round pick from Kentucky. They took him 43rd overall. Your thoughts on Wan'Dale Robinson?
He pass. Pass. I'm not targeting him in rookie drafts. Like, I don't believe in what he did at Kentucky. He kind of beat up on the lower end of competition, their non-conference opponents and the Vanderbilts of the world in the SEC. When he got up and played against the big dogs, like, I was never really impressed with what he did. So he might find a role in this offense, but he's not going to be on my roster to find a role on mine.
Yeah, I think even in rookie drafts, you're going to have to get – I think he's going to go for a lot higher than what he's actually worth. So, again, with Daniel Jones being Daniel Jones, and I know we're starting to sound like a broken record, but, all things run through the quarterback in the NFL, and if you don't have a reliable one, then you don't have anything, really. So, I would say I am not targeting Wan'Dale Robinson. He's a stash away in a dynasty that maybe somehow, some way they upgrade at the quarterback position. Beyond that, I'm not looking for him in redraft leagues by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through a ton of rookie drafts so far. I think I've drafted him once just so I could, have a piece of him somewhere. And also, like, every pick that I was targeting in that second round had gone the 5 picks before me. So that was more the reason for that one. So I'm out on Wan'Dale Robinson. The Giants have way too many issues with this wide receiver room for me to really key on anybody other than Kenny Golladay, which kind of pains me to say heading into our next guy here, because the guy that I've always have targeted, but Sterling Shepard, wide receiver 98, 36 receptions, 53 targets, 366 yards, 1 touchdown, 9.5% target share. Your thoughts on Sterling Shep?
I'm passing on Sterling Shepard at the moment too. And this sounds bad, and maybe I shouldn't even say it, but I don't have a filter, so I'm going to say it anyway, is the dude's like 1 concussion away from being a vegetable. Like, he just keeps getting his bell rung. Some people are just predisposed to have concussions easier. Sterling Shepard seems to be that guy. Dinged up a little bit. Again, not enough balls to go around. Him, Slayton, pass. Like, you can find 1,000 of those guys in a draft on more high-powered offenses.
Seconded and co-signed.
All right. Yeah, I mean, Sterling Shepard, they even went through and restructured his contract where he took a pay cut to stay with the Giants on this one. So, I think that they see a role for him, but I just don't necessarily trust that one for fantasy. So I am going to be out on Sterling Shepard. Kadarius Toney, wide receiver 94 last year, 39 receptions, 57 targets, 420 yards, 0 touchdowns, 10% target share. Thoughts on Kadarius Toney?
I like Kadarius Toney when he's healthy. He had a hamstring issue, then he had a hand issue, but God bless it, does that game against Dallas not stand out in everybody's mind with what could be for Kadarius Toney? And I think that's the upside, right? That's what you're going for. So redraft leagues, I'm hoping he falls probably a bit farther than what he will. Dynasty leagues, I will still take a flyer on him in the mid rounds if he's fallen that far because of youth and because of the upside that we saw. But things are going to have to fall right, and I'm going to have to be comfortable with my roster because, again, it's Daniel Jones, guys. And we have no idea who's going to be filling in for Daniel Jones in years to come. But it's safe to say then you're going to have a rookie quarterback and pains that you have to walk through with that. So buyer beware. But if you're comfortable with your roster makeup, I think he's a guy worth taking a risk on in the mid rounds.
All right. Kadarius Toney's a guy that, I could see easily putting on my roster in about, round 10, round 11. That's probably where I'd feel pretty comfortable doing that. As a wide receiver 4 or 5 on my roster. Other than that, I think I would pass on him much earlier than that one. So, all righty, guys, let's go ahead and move on into the tight ends. Ricky Seals-Jones finished tight end at 33, 30 receptions, 49 targets, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 9% target share on the Washington team last year. Thoughts on Ricky Seals-Jones?
Derek, if you could, those 2 touchdowns that Ricky Seals-Jones scored, same game, right?
Well, give me a moment. I'll pull it up here.
I feel like they were in the same game because it was a guy that, like, he was one of those tight
separate
ends.
Games. He had
separate games.
He had 1 touchdown in week 2 and 1 touchdown in week 6.
Okay, so I remember, targeting Ricky Seals-Jones on the waiver wire last year because I needed tight end help in the worst way. So I do recall him being one of the options that I was going after, but really, once I got him on the roster, there wasn't really much that he did. Again, I know we've said this a lot, but it is Daniel Jones, and it's just going to be a tough go of things for the Giants. It's remarkable that they won 4 games last year, but it's going to be a tough go for them, man. Like it's just going to be tough as long as Daniel Jones is back there, under center. So. I would say that, while Ricky Seals-Jones, he's, the opposite of CJ Uzomah, like we were talking about earlier, where that's a guy that I think is okay based on the quarterback that's going to be throwing to him. I don't think that Ricky Seals-Jones is a guy that I'm in on just because of the guy that's throwing to him.
Yeah, pass. He's another tight end I'm not looking at. Like, I'm not even going to take a sniff.
Yep. Touchdown dependent and potential waiver wire stream. That's the most that I'll designate him at for my roster. Heading over to QB room, Daniel Jones. We've had so many wonderful things to say about Daniel Jones, quarterback 27, 232 completions, 361 attempts, 64.3% completion percentage, 2,428 yards, 10 TDs, 7 interceptions, 62 rushes, 298 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Daniel Jones?
There was a time last year where he was like QB3.
Yeah.
Like he started out really well last year, and everyone's going, "Holy crap! Is this the Daniel Jones that we thought we were gonna get?" And then
Week 5 happened.
Week 5 happened. He got dinged up and knocked out right against Dallas, and then just kind of puttered wrong for the rest of the season. And then week 13 and beyond, he was out. So it is a prove it year. We all know it. This is no secret within any type of football community, right? It is a prove it year for Daniel Jones. If he wants to remain a starting quarterback in the league, he is going to have to absolutely ball out this year. I don't see that happening. I think he's just serviceable enough to finish, mid QB2. Like, he's a guy who's probably going to finish, almost in the same area as Zach Wilson is, right? Like 17 through 22 somewhere is where he's going to finish. So it doesn't do enough. There's too many questions. The turnovers are crazy. So if you get hammered in turnovers in your league, Daniel Jones is not the guy for you because of the fumbles. So that, and I just don't love everything that the Giants have offensively at the moment. So I'm passing again on Daniel Jones this season.
I don't think he finishes in the QB2 range. I think he finishes on the bench. Like, I don't think he makes it through the whole season. So
that's entirely possible.
Which I know wasn't part of the question that you were trying to answer, but I do believe that he is not the Giants starter for the entire season, be it through injuries or be it through just poor performance that he gets replaced. So while I do say, like, hey, in Superflex leagues, starting quarterbacks are valuable, Daniel Jones is not one of them for me.
Right.
No. And as a quarterback, he's never played a full season.
No.
In 3 years, he still hasn't played a full season at quarterback. He's finished 24, 24, and 27. Like, So I'm probably high at 17 or 18. It's probably more realistic that he finishes 22 to 25.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I'd rather have Zach Wilson than Daniel Jones this year for fantasy. Like flat out, I would rather have Zach Wilson and the promise of what the Jets offense looks to be than what this Giants offense makeup looks like. And the nebulous situation we have at the wide receiver room, they actually downgraded, I think, as far as the tight end room goes. Saquon is starting to show a little bit of his age, and I think has lost a step there. So, yeah, I'm going to be out on Daniel Jones. I don't know that there's even like the only way that I would draft him is if I absolutely had to have a third quarterback on that. He was the only guy left that was a starting QB at that realm. Like I would rather have just about anybody else for that position there. So I am going to be out on Daniel Jones. Any other thoughts on this Giants? All righty. Let's go ahead and head over to Carolina. 5-12 last year, 57% pass, 43% run, ranked 29th in points for, 30th in yards for. Head coach Matt Rule, new offensive coordinator, and Ben McAdoo. And we'll just start with the running back room here. Christian McCaffrey, running back 39, 99 rush attempts, 452 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 37 receptions, 41 targets, 343 yards, 1 TD. Your thoughts on CMC?
When healthy, I think CMC is still a top 5 back in this league. I don't think we're ever going to see that historic run from him again. But another guy, we're 2 years removed from him being like truly fantasy relevant because of these injuries that keep popping up. So,
right.
And the scary thing is they're soft tissue injuries, right? Like it's not a broken bone where maybe it's a fluke thing and it heals back and everything else. We've seen a history of this where once soft tissue injuries creep up, they continue to go on and nag, and it's almost like he spends too much time in the weight room, right? And his body can't fully recover before game day. So I have shares of Christian McCaffrey. I am not actively looking to move him playing off the upside, but at the same time, if the right value came around, I would also trade him. He's a guy who's going to go in the first round of fantasy drafts in any type of redraft format. Really, you might be able to sneak him into the top end of the second round if it's a super flex league that goes quarterback heavy to start. But, his upside is running back 1, but the gap between what his running back 1 would be and running backs 2, 3, and 4. Like he's not that much better than Jonathan Taylor anymore. I don't think he's that much better than Dalvin Cook. Like, so the gap has shrunk quite a bit. On top of, you never know what you're going to get out of, why am I blanking on out of a guy like Najee, right? And just kind of push him there in that top 5. So great player. Really the best player to own as far as the Panthers go when healthy. But you're just going to have to take that gamble because the last 2 seasons say his body is wearing down on him, and you're going to have to draft a backup plan right away, as opposed to with some of these where fluke injuries pop up where you have to play it on the fly.
I think the issue with McCaffrey, obviously, he can't stay healthy, but he's so dang effective when he is on the field that, is it worth the risk of you only getting him for 4 or 5 games? I think he's played 10 games the last 2 seasons combined. Like that's it. And so, that's the risk. You spend really high draft capital on this guy, and it's great when he is playing, but he isn't playing, as much as he is. So that really, there's a lot to consider when you think about Christian McCaffrey. I mean, for 2 years, guys, he was automatic number 1. Don't even think twice. Hit draft, move on. And that's not the case anymore with him. So I think you have to be very confident in what you have. Yes, the Avs just won it in overtime. Okay, thank you. I think you have to be very confident in what you have with the rest of your roster, and you have to be able to absorb the fact that I probably just woke up my fiance too. That's bad. You probably have to be able to absorb the fact that that he's not going to be available for a majority of the season. So that was poor timing because I lost my train of thought. But the Avs just won and they beat St. Louis 3-2 in overtime. Remember how I said earlier about the only good part about playoff overtime hockey is when your team's not in it? I was very distracted the last 15 minutes because my team was in it and it's not fun.
Oh, excuse me while I compose myself on Alex's outburst there. But yeah, you guys have hit this one, and I'm not going to spend much more time here other than to say that Christian McCaffrey is one of the rare players out there that can finish in a top 5 positional, weekly ranking for fantasy and not score a touchdown. Like there's very few players that can do that. You look week 1 last year, finished running back number 1 on the week and didn't score a touchdown. Week 10 would finish number 5 on the week, didn't score a touchdown. And there's very few players out there that can do that. And I think that you're going to see Carolina potentially try and do a little bit more of a committee this year than what we've seen in the past. So I think that there is some reason to potentially try and temper the expectations here a little bit. Them bringing in some of the guys that they've brought in and some of the pieces that are now in this running back room. I think that they are going to, I don't think you're going to see him really get a 100% workload type of thing like we've seen in the past. I think you're probably going to see him more around a 75% type of workload. To that point, right, he still will be a top 5 back. But again, I don't think that the distance between him and the other running backs in that kind of tier is much of a gap anymore at all. So I'll be drafting him if he falls to me in the right spot. If I'm in the back half of a first round type of thing, I'll probably take my shot on him there, but I'm not a guy that I'm probably going to be looking to take with the first or second overall pick type of thing, which is where he'll go in a lot of leagues, I do believe. So let's go ahead and head on over to the other running back that they just brought in from the Titans, Donta Foreman, running back 56 last year, 133 rush attempts, 566 yards, 3 touchdowns, 9 receptions, 11 targets, 123 yards, 0 touchdowns. Thoughts on Donta Foreman?
If I'm drafting Christian McCaffrey, I'm getting my hands on this guy.
This is the handcuff.
This is the handcuff. Now, he performed very well in service of Derrick Henry, who was injured last year, right? And Tennessee did like a weird 3-headed, 2-headed, 4-headed, 3-headed, 2-headed running back committee. And I said all those for a reason, because if you go back and look at how they split it out, that's kind of how it went. But he was very serviceable. So he's the handcuff. Like, he is the guy. It's not Chuba Hubbard. It's Donta Foreman. And if I'm drafting McCaffrey, I'm getting him. That's where his value is. There is no standalone value at this point. He is purely a handcuff, but that's okay, because I am a believer if you're going after and you land one of those top, 5, 6 running backs who have a clear running back, a clear backup behind them, handcuff that sucker. Yeah, I mean, it just is what it is. So that's where his value is, but I'm okay with that, and I will draft him accordingly.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I did this last year where I had CMC, and I made sure I grabbed as many shares of Chuba Hubbard as I possibly could because of that, because I knew that I wasn't going to have a ton of CMC. I think Donta Foreman fills that role this year as Chuba Hubbard, starts to become a little bit more, acclimated to the NFL. And really he was just thrust into, I don't know that the Panthers really wanted to thrust him into action as much and as early as they had to, but they had to. Now you bring in a veteran like Donta Foreman who's familiar with that role, and it just makes it a little bit easier. And now you can kind of put Chuba Hubbard on the path that you wanted to put him on when you got him initially. So I like Donta Foreman here, especially if you've got CMC shares, but I also don't mind him as a standalone, or as somebody that you pick, and maybe the guy who's got CMC, that asking price gets a little bit better when you float the trade out there halfway through the season, and the guy who's got CMC isn't too happy with seeing him on his bench every week.
I mean, it very well could be, right? And this is the guy that I think that they'll actually spell CMC with a little bit as far as the run game, maybe take some of the wear and tear off of him a little bit and try and stretch that out. And it's not going to surprise me to see Donta Foreman get at least 100 carries this year when it's all said and done, right? Like, not going to surprise me to see see them bring him in and run a series or two just to get CMC off the field, give him a little bit of a break here and there, and maybe take a little bit of the grind and wear and tear off of him. So I think Devonta Foreman, while he doesn't necessarily hold standalone value, is absolutely the handcuff on this one, because if CMC goes down, you're going to see Devonta Foreman in there for the running side, and you're going to see Chuba Hubbard come in on the passing side of it. And I think, you know what, let's just go ahead and head right over there now. Chuba Hubbard, running back 33 last year in his rookie year, 172 rush attempts, 612 yards, 5 touchdowns, 25 receptions, 37 targets, 174 yards, and 1 touchdown. Guys, your thoughts on Chuba?
Regression city. He's not going to have those touchdowns again.
No.
Like, he might have 1 or 2, but you're going to see that fall off. You're going to see his attempts fall off. So Chuba is back to undrafted in my board.
Yeah, I would agree. I just don't think that there's enough snaps to go around for the 3 of them for sure, as especially if, you know, all 3 of them are healthy throughout the duration of the season. So it'll be a regression. It won't be through any fault of his own. It'll just be that's the way the game plan shakes out. Sorry, kid.
Yeah, you know, those 2 or 3 possessions that I just said that they're gonna bring Devonta Foreman in and spell CMC a little bit. Chuba Hubbard comes in on 3rd down on that series and does pass pro and comes out of the backfield on that one. That's where I see his role being on this one. You know, he doesn't have standalone value, doesn't really even have handcuff value for me on this one. So I'm going to be out on Chuba Hubbard. You know, very much what you said, that part of the reason that he had fantasy value last year was he was the lone guy behind CMC. So yep, I'm going to be out on that one. Let's go ahead and head over to the wide receiver room, unless we have any other thoughts here on this running back room. All righty. DJ Moore, wide receiver 18 last year, 93 receptions, 163 targets, 1,157 yards, 4 touchdowns, 28% target share. Thoughts on DJ Moore?
I like DJ Moore. I like that target share number, right? Like, yes, it's Sam Darnold. Yes, the quality of targets weren't quite there, but that target share is really, really nice to have. If you can get him as your second wide receiver, it's worth the gamble, right? The touchdowns weren't there, so that's kind of what gave him that step back. But if he goes from 4 back up to 6 or 7, he's right back there at fringe wide receiver 1 territory. He competes. They use him slightly in the run game just to kind of mix it up and different wrinkles in the game. And, anytime I can get a wide receiver 2 that has 163 targets, I'm going to try and take my chances on that. I really like DJ Moore.
Yeah, wide receiver 2 with almost 1,200 yards too. Really, the only disappointing part of his season last year was the touchdowns, and there just wasn't enough of them. There needed to be a few more, and it would have been a stellar season. And that's where,
and it's all hinging on McCaffrey, right? Going back 2 slides, the games that McCaffrey played, DJ Moore was lights out because defenses had to focus on that. But when DJ Moore was really the only source of offense, it was a struggle, and he could not breathe in the end zone, on top of the fact that Sam Darnold could not thread the needle and get the ball to him in the end zone.
Right. Yeah, very true. With DJ Moore, right, 75% of his touchdowns came in the first 4 weeks, right? Like, he had a touchdown in week 2, 2 touchdowns in week 4, and then nothing until week 18, which for fantasy purposes doesn't matter because the season was essentially over for fantasy managers, except for the few folks out there that played a week 18 championship last year. So and really the sad thing was he came out lights out through the first 4 weeks there and then just disappeared. And it really kind of had a lot to do with went very similar to how we saw Sam Darnold go, right? Sam Darnold came out the gate swinging, right? Like, Kevin, you mentioned that on Daniel Jones a team ago, where came out, was looking really good, was, QB, was ranked very high. Sam Darnold was a similar thing. And then all of a sudden,
RB1 for a couple weeks because of all those rushing touchdowns to start the season.
Yes. And then just the wheels fell off and that went with it. And the sad thing is that with DJ Moore, right? Like, if you're banking on Christian McCaffrey being healthy, the target share is going to come way down on that one, right? Like, DJ Moore with Christian McCaffrey in this offense, DJ Moore is probably closer to 120 target count instead of 160. And if it's 120 target share with Sam Darnold throwing the ball, that's like getting 80 on another team with a competent quarterback. So yes, I'm taking digs at Sam Darnold there, but
my hope is that because of McCaffrey, the quality of the targets goes up.
There you
right?
go.
So even though the number might go down, we're going to see a little bit more quality in those targets, and he's not just going to throw it to the one guy he trusts.
Right. Which I think that was very much the thing last year, was just huck it up and hope DJ Moore could bail you out. Because he's an exceptional wide receiver. Unfortunately, we haven't seen him in a great offensive setting and without competent quarterback play really his entire NFL career here. And we're hoping that changes in the future here. But I like DJ Moore, and DJ Moore is a guy that I have a ton on all of my dynasties out there, and is a guy that I'm actually currently sitting here debating on in one of our startups here, going back and forth on that one. So well spoken on my love for DJ Moore and what I think of him from a football player perspective. I just, am not sure that we're going to get much different than what we've seen so far in his career. Great receptions, great yardage, poor touchdown type of deal. And that ultimately keeps him out of being a wide receiver one year after year. Is just that touchdowns, can't seem to get above 4 or 5. So any other thoughts, DJ Moore?
Yeah, I know that we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but I think there will be another change that will greatly help DJ Moore this year.
All righty. Robby Anderson, wide receiver 49, 53 receptions, 110 targets, 519 yards, 5 touchdowns, 19% target share. That giggle was the less than 50% reception rate.
Yeah, it was terrible to start the season, right? Absolutely terrible through like the first 11 weeks. So,
yes,
honestly, Robby, I'm
for all of those.
Yeah, he's the guy I'm not picking up. Right? It's McCaffrey and it's DJ Moore, and that's really about it. Unless I guess Dante Foreman for the handcuff. That's it. I'm not jumping in on a bunch of this. I don't trust Sam Darnold, and we're just gonna fly by his 2 main targets and go from there.
So I apologize for being distracted earlier, but I remember, do you guys remember this last year about how giddy we were talking about the Carolina Panthers and the offense, and how, we were so excited to get a piece of it? Well, the piece that I ended up getting in a lot of leagues was Robby Anderson, and I'm not very thrilled with that pickup. So I am not as bullish as I was earlier, or last year, I guess, going into last year on Robby Anderson. I've been burned. And so because of that, again, another personal reason, like maybe to my detriment, but fantasy football is all about what you feel is right. And I feel like not getting screwed over by Robby Anderson again. So I'm out on Robby Anderson as well.
Yeah, Robby Anderson was a guy that I was excited to take in a lot of places last year, simply from the standpoint that you could get a pretty good discount on him. And we thought that, the progression was going to continue from what we saw. Like that was, Sam Darnold and him had that relationship with the Jets, and we thought that might continue on, having seen a different side of Robby Anderson, having played with Teddy Bridgewater, and none of that came to fruition. And I'm still not necessarily a fan of this Carolina offense outside of the couple of main pieces that we've already touched on. And I will not be looking for Robby Anderson on really any of my rosters there.
He had in one more game played in 21 versus 20, he had 26 less targets, 42 less receptions, and 500 less yards. Never mind, the touchdowns went up, but still, good God.
Right. Yeah. Just not at all a thing. And this is one of those that you would have thought that in a season where Christian McCaffrey was out, we would have actually seen more usage on that one. And, even though 19% target share, not many of those balls seem to be catchable. All right, let's go ahead and head over to a, off-season acquisition. Rashard Higgins coming in, was on the Browns last year, wide receiver 115, 24 receptions, 47 targets, 275 yards, 1 touchdown, 9.5% target share. Thoughts on Rashard Higgins?
pass. He's a depth piece for the Panthers. Holds no real fantasy value.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not even, like you hope that he goes off 1 week or anything. He will be there to spell one of these other two guys for a couple routes, a couple series, and then that's it.
Cosign. And moving on to Terrace Marshall, wide receiver 142, 17 receptions, 30 targets, 138 yards, 0 touchdowns, 5% target share. Thoughts on Terrence Marshall?
He is a late round stash in dynasty leagues. I'm not touching him in redraft leagues. Part of it's the quarterback and the competency that you get or don't get with Sam Darnold. But he is a highly touted wide receiver coming out of LSU, right? Like, we really liked his landing spot last year, as Sam Darnold, was falling off a cliff as far as fantasy value last season. Is typically when you see rookie wide receivers start to understand everything. So I don't expect him to be drafted, so I'm going to keep an eye on him on my waiver wire, but that's pretty much where he's going to sit until he can truly supplant Robby Anderson as that number 2 guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, this was one of those that I thought that Terrace Marshall was a guy that he definitely, coming out of college, had like first round NFL draft potential on that one, had some injuries at LSU that kind of held him out there, and you ultimately saw his draft stock slip a little bit into the second round. But this was a guy that I thought was going to come out and just, really, come into the league with a bang. And that one did not happen at all. Really wasn't a, piece on this Carolina offense, wasn't really involved in the offense, it seemed like. And you're kind of hoping that changes, because I do have him stashed in a couple of dynasty leagues here. But Kevin's hit this one right on the head. It's a wait and see type of deal when it comes to redraft. Tight end room, Tommy Tremble, tight end 47, 20 receptions, 35 targets, 180 yards, 1 touchdown, 6% target share. Thoughts on Tommy Tremble?
He's going to be trembling down my rankings list, and I'm not drafting him.
I see what you did there.
No.
Hard pass for me as well. I just don't see the value in these tight ends for fantasy purposes on this Carolina offense, which going to lead us into another one. Ian Thomas, tight end 59, 18 receptions. Thoughts on Ian Thomas last year or for this year?
No.
They keep saying they like him and then never use him. So
right.
He's a good inline blocker. He's a nice big bodied guy to help with chip blocking and run support, but another guy that I'm not drafting.
Fair enough. And I think that's a cosign and a unanimous for all of us. Let's go ahead and move into this quarterback room. Sam Darnold, quarterback 28, 243 completions, 406 attempts, almost a 60% completion percentage, 2,527 yards, 9 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 48 rushes, 222 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Your thoughts on Sam Darnold?
He keeps getting the dreaded vote of confidence, but this is another prove it year, right? If Sam Darnold can't get it done this year, the coaching staff is gone. They're bringing new guys in. Sam Darnold will be gone. Obviously, we'll touch on the rookie that they drafted here in just a second. But I learned my lesson with that last year. I took the gamble, thinking it was going to be kind of worthwhile as the Bears limped along with Justin Fields. And then as soon as Justin Fields started playing, it didn't matter how bad Justin Fields was to start. He gave me more promise than Sam Darnold did, so I'm not going anywhere near this.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like Sam Darnold, and I'm looking at some recent reports out there, and while their GM was talking to Florio and said, "Look, Sam Darnold's the starter, but," and then anytime there's a but, that position's open for grabs. Well, that doesn't exactly sound so great. Like, I know you want to promote healthy competition, but you want to promote healthy competition at literally every other spot except for starting quarterback. That's a spot that you want to have one guy locked down and make sure that it doesn't go away. at any given time. So I don't know that Sam Darnold plays the whole season, but I will give you guys this question to ponder. Which quarterback starts more games of the, two quarterbacks that we were just kind of talking about with Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold? Which one do you think starts more games this year?
Oh. Do I have to pick?
It is a 50-50 proposition, so yes.
Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones. That coaching staff is new. They're not fighting for anything. So if they suck, they suck, and then they'll just get a higher draft pick next year. The Panthers coaching staff is playing for their jobs along with Sam Darnold. So I do think he ends up playing a little more.
I would agree with that, except for, and Derek, I'll let you give your answer before I go into my thoughts here.
Gotcha. I'm actually looking something up here real quick because.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll let you look something up, and I will give you my thoughts. Because I don't think that the Panthers coaching staff is fighting for their jobs. I think the indication that the Panthers coaching staff was fighting for their jobs would have been they take a quarterback in the first round of the draft. Instead, they didn't. And so that to me feels like there's security and there's confidence.
Only one
in
team
what they're doing.
did, and that's because they really didn't have one at all.
I understand, but there was a good quarterback out there that the Panthers had their pick. They had their pick of all of the quarterbacks, and they didn't take one. So to me, that screams we've got job security here. We understand that this is a long con. Wasn't Matt Rule was signed to like a 9-year contract or whatever the heck it was? Yeah, 7-year contract.
And he's 2 years in.
So I think there is some sense of they're trying to build something here. They took a swing with Sam Darnold and they missed, and I think their ownership kind of understands the game that you have to play outside of season to season. So I don't know that they necessarily think they are on the hot seat. And I think they're going to do whatever gives them the best chance to win this year. I don't know that includes Sam Darnold this year because I think you bring in a Matt Corral for that reason. But I'm not necessarily subscribed to the whole if the Panthers suck again this year, then the coaching staff is all, posting their resumes on Indeed.
I don't know. They very well might. They very well might be out after this year, right? Even with the 7-year contract that they gave Matt Rule. This is one of those that you've seen them make some faux pas repeatedly at the quarterback position during his tenure, right? Like you have Cam Newton supposed to be coming off a healthy deal, yada, yada, yada. You bring in Teddy Bridgewater, sign him for more money than what you had Cam Newton onto the roster for. And then, that doesn't work out well. And you ship Teddy Bridgewater off after bringing in Sam Darnold and giving up, a fair bit in draft capital for Sam Darnold to get him in to not have that one work out for you. So I think to answer your question there, Alex, I think you're right. I think it is Daniel Jones because I think, come weeks 13, 14, if we see the Carolina Panthers having been as bad again this year as I think that they're going to be, I think that they're going to just give Matt Corral a shot here and see what happens here. But Sam Darnold's, again, a guy for fantasy purposes I'm going to be staying away from. I think that, again, that you're going to see him finish outside of QB2 when it's all said and done for fantasy football here. Any other thoughts on the Sam Darnold? All righty, Matt Corral, the rookie that they just drafted in the 3rd round, pick 94 from Ole Miss. Thoughts on Matt Corral?
I think that he's recovering from his injury, but I do think that he'll at least be given the opportunity to take a couple first-team reps, and they're going to see what they have. And if things don't go well with Sam Darnold, right? If he starts the season like he ended last year and they feel like Matt Corral's ready or could at least provide a little bit of a jolt with this offense, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in there, at some point at mid-season trying to see what they have in this kid. So he's a stash. He's probably the second most likely rookie quarterback to start this season out, number one being Kenny Pickett, right? So Pickett and then Corral might have the next best chance unless, Marcus Mariota has the same trainer that Tyrod Taylor had in San Diego with the Chargers before they moved to LA.
No, they were in LA.
Yeah, they were in LA.
First season in LA, so they're in LA with the Chargers. So if it's the same training staff, maybe it's Desmond Ridder. But Corral, and we covered him. Corral can be electric, right? He's a dynamic quarterback. Like, sometimes he doesn't make the best decisions. I think learning an NFL offense will be a little bit harder for him, coming with Lane Kiffin's, billboard signs and, chicken wing calls there on the sideline. But in the same token, playing in the NFL means that he's not going to have bottles of mustard thrown at him like he did in Knoxville. So maybe he's a little bit more successful in Carolina.
I think, that's going to be the hardest transition, is actually like getting into a huddle and calling plays and communicating with guys verbally versus nonverbal. I think that's going to be the toughest transition for Matt Corral, because literally that is Lane Kiffin. Is everybody looks to the sideline, figure out what 4 pictographs he's thrown up on that board, do the fake clap, then look over to the sideline again to make sure that that's still the play we're running. So that's going to be the hardest part for Matt Corral. Pretty unfortunate injury that he suffered there against Baylor in the Sugar Bowl. But it was, for all intents and purposes, it seems like he's going to be ready to go come week 1, like fully healthy. So that'll give him enough time, a full training camp, you hope, under his belt, and then he'll compete. I agree with you, Kevin. I think he is the most likely other rookie to see playing time this year. And I think they'll see what they got with him. If Darnold is struggling and playing the way that he finished last season, I think Matt Corral gets in sooner rather than later. So for fantasy wise, I mean, I think there's value there towards the end of your rookie draft or your middle round, because quarterbacks, those strings go, and you got to pay attention to when those runs happen on quarterbacks so you don't get left out. But I think in a redraft league too, especially in a super flex, he's somebody that if you can afford the bench position to sit on it and wait, maybe worth your while.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd go with that route there. If I'm looking at him in redraft, I'm probably leaving him on the waiver wire, because he will go undrafted at that point, and I'll just keep an eye on him and keep tabs on what it looks like in Carolina. Potentially going that route there. But at that point, right, I'm looking to add him as my third type of QB onto my roster, because I should have already secured my other 2 in a super flex long before we get into the break glass in case of Matt Corral type of emergency. So he's a guy that has some intrigue, has some upside there. I think you're right. He could very well see some playing time, especially towards the back half of the season. This Carolina team, I don't think is going to be very good. This is one of those that it's really going to come down to them or the Falcons as far as who's going to be the worst team in that NFC South. So, tough decisions to make there as far as who's going to be the worst team in that division. And it very well could be that we see these things duking it out there week 18 to finally settle that as who's going to be the worst team in that division. But I'm going to be out on Matt Corral, especially for drafting purposes for redraft, but I will be keeping an eye on him just on the off chance that he does come in and have some spark there. Guys, any other thoughts on the Carolina Panthers?
What a difference a year makes, man. We were so giddy for this Carolina offense last year when we did this, and just not anymore.
No, not at all. But, well, guys, any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Stay tuned. More team breakdowns. We keep inching closer. Watch your playoff hockey. It is really, really fun. We've been saying this for weeks now. Like, watch playoff hockey while you're statting out players or just browsing through websites or whatever. But y'all stay safe. Stay tuned for more information. Hit up our socials that Derek will plug here in just a second. And thank you for tuning in.
Take it away, Derek.
Alrighty. So guys, again, thanks for tuning in here. Make sure you check us out on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Good Old Boys FF. You can find all sorts of good content as well on goodoldboysff.com. And do us the big favor of going over to YouTube, subscribing to the YouTube show, Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast on YouTube. Click the subscribe button and make sure that you're getting all the latest content coming from us, because we even got a ton of little great shorts over there, a ton of player profile videos that'll be coming out there. So that way, when you're sitting there and you're about on the clock and you go, man, I just can't decide between these two guys, don't you worry. We've got you covered, because we've got some of those short player breakdowns that you can sit there and get the boys' thoughts on quick, fast, and in a hurry to help you make better drafting decisions and get you set up right for your redraft deals. But that's going to do it for us. For Kevin and Alex, I'm Derek. Have a great one. Be safe.